Welcome everybody to Phoenix Books here in beautiful downtown Burlington, Vermont. And tonight at Phoenix Books, we are really happy to have, for the second time in this new store, which is really exciting for us, Katharine Britton. Katharine has written her second novel called Little Island, and it's a really interesting story of an extended New England family. Her first novel, Her Sister's Shadow, we also hosted her here for that, so we're really excited to have Katharine back tonight. Katharine lives in Norwich, Vermont, and likes to garden there, has real fun with her dogs. She teaches at Dartmouth, which is just across the Connecticut River into New Hampshire. And I just learned today that she had a screenplay that won an award at, what was the? Moon Dance International Festival, which is really, really exciting. So please welcome Katharine Britton.
I want to really thank you. And I also want to give a big shout out to Phoenix Bookstore. This is what I think all bookstores should look like. It is the quintessential bookstore. It's the right size. The colors are great. I just think it has a nice feel to it. They're comfortable chairs just where you want them. So, yeah, this is part of what authors do to market their books, is go around to independent bookstores, the few that are left, and do reading. So thank you for coming and supporting independent bookstores and struggling authors. We have roughly till 8 o'clock. And so what I want to do during that time is talk a little bit about writing, the writing of Little Island. And then I'm going to read a 7-minute excerpt from the beginning of the book. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about specific things I was trying to do with this book. But I'm going to open it up to questions. So be thinking. And if you don't have any questions, this is about a family gathering. I might be asking you about your family gatherings. So that should sufficiently motivate you to come up with a question or two for me. And then I have a couple of other excerpts that I'll read from the book. And yeah, and then we can chat informally. So anybody know what an author's second book is called? Any guesses on that?
Sophomore.
Sophomore book? And what is the association we have with the word sophomore? Slump, yes, yes. And I had a little bit of a sophomore slump with Little Island, which is, this is about 3 years ago, and my editor had Her Sister's Shadow, the manuscript, and so I was waiting for notes from her, so I couldn't do anything on that. And so I knew I wanted to write another book, and there were just two things standing in my way. One is I had no idea what to write about. And the other was I was pretty sure I'd used all my good material in my first book. So I was in a bit of a slump. And so one of the things that I used to tell people when I was doing readings for Her Sister's Shadow, and when you're an unknown, unpublished author, no one is waiting for your book, obviously, because no one knows you're writing one, and nobody cares. Absolutely. There's a few friends and family back home, but pretty much the world at large doesn't know, and they don't care. And I thought that was a problem. Well, when you go to write your second book, there were two people who did know, and they were waiting, and that was my agent and my editor. And they both knew I was planning to write a second book, and they didn't want me to wait too long. And it turns out that that's a much bigger problem when you don't know what you're going to write about and you think you've used all your good material. So while I was contemplating having the shortest literary career on history, I was over in Maine with my husband, and we were vacationing, and so we had this second story unit at this kind of resort place on the coast of Maine, and next door was this cottage, and the extended family started to gather. So writers are just nosy. We're just nosy. I mean, we're always attuned for that perfect bit of dialogue that we're going to put in our next book, or this great image. So I spent a lot of time kind of hanging on the railing, watching this family come and go, and people would arrive, and groupings would form on the front lawn and out on the rocks, and dusk fell, and the guys all went out on the deck ostensibly to grill, but really they were just drinking beer and chatting, and the women had all migrated inside, and they were probably, supposed to be making salads, but they were drinking white wine and chatting. And during the weekend, cars would disappear, and then they'd all be back, and towels. So I just watched this familiar ebb and flow. It reminded me of my own family gatherings, that there's this certain physical dynamic to a family gathering. And I thought, that would make a good foundation for a novel. And my first book was about two sisters in late midlife, and they've been estranged for 40 years. So I thought, okay, this next book I want to write about an intact, happy family. I'd done enough of the we're not talking to each other and we hate each other. So this is going to be an intact, and siblings who get along. So Tolstoy says all happy families are alike, right? And also they don't really make for very interesting novels. So I gave my family, and their last name is Little, hence the name Little Island. They do have a small island in Maine. And if you're familiar with the coast of Maine, there's an island called Vinyl Haven, which is just off of Rockland. So it's loosely modeled after Vinyl Haven and a little tiny island attached to it called Lane's Preserve. I changed the names, and you could not navigate your way around Vinyl Haven using my book, but that's roughly where it is. And so I gave my family a tragedy in their past, that this weekend gathering is on the 20th anniversary of this tragedy that really did very much change the course of several of the family members' lives, and really changed the dynamic within the family, and added a lot of resentments and sort of repressed anger at one another, and it just changed the family pretty significantly. And then I gave each of the family members some challenges, something to ruminate about all weekend while they were together. So I gave them each a life. And this, I think, is what makes gatherings of any kind, especially family gatherings, but really any gathering, even something like this. Each one of us here has had, something happen today. You might have had a great day, you might have had a terrible day at work, maybe you have an aging parent, maybe you have just had a fight with your child, maybe your dog is sick. So each one of us has stuff going on. And all of that is here, and we're not probably going to talk about it at first, but if we were to spend the weekend together, by Sunday we'd know a lot more about, and so there's all this, there's overt, stuff that we will talk about initially, and then there's all of the stuff that's going on in our lives. So I gave each of my characters something. Some baggage, in addition to the luggage that they're hauling along to the island. They have a lot of baggage. And then I put them on an island, which is a constrained environment, and I compressed it into a weekend. So I really kind of turned the heat up on this happy, intact family. So I want to just quickly go through who the characters are, and then I'll read the excerpt. So we have Grace, who is the matriarch of the family, and her mother has just died, and she's planning her memorial service. So that's the reason for the gathering. And then her husband, who's Edgar, and he goes by Gar, has an incipient case of the dwindles. Otherwise, he's pretty much fine, but he's lost a fishing lure, so that's kind of what he's looking for all weekend. And then there's the older daughter, Joy, who is a recent empty nester. She has one child and he's just gone off to college. And she realizes that morning, literally, that she's leaving, that she doesn't know who she is without a child to take care of. And is not quite sure what her marriage is going to be like either without the child there. And there's also, remember this tragedy, this 20th anniversary. And then there's the younger daughter, Tamar, and she is a sort of bossy and controlling lawyer with really bad parenting skills. And she brings her 8-year-old twins with her alone to the island, leaves her husband at home. And then there's Roger, the brother, who is a lovable screw-up with substance abuse issues and a long history of trouble on the island. And then there's Sophie, the Glenavon Mall Terrier, because I always put a dog in my books. So that's the cast of characters, and they're here for a weekend, and it's the 20th anniversary of this crash. So, okay, so this is the opening. Little Island Gathering is the name of the first section, Joy. I sat at our kitchen table amid the remains of a hasty breakfast and let the silence slowly swallow me up, the way the stealthy tide steals in and surrounds Spectacle Island, stranding unwary visitors. An hour earlier, I'd watched my husband and our son Rex set off for Cornell. My son's trunk, suitcases, skis, computer components, and new bedding filling the back of our Highlander. Soon, I would be on my way to Little Island. I didn't think my mother would have chosen this weekend for my grandmother's memorial service had she remembered that Friday was the 20th anniversary of the crash. And yet, I couldn't imagine that she'd forgotten. No mother could forget such a thing. So I'd begun to wonder if it was a sign, all of us together again without the outlaws, as Daddy humorously, if unoriginally, refers to my husband, Stuart, and to my sister's husband, Daniel. I took a large gulp of coffee, but couldn't swallow. My throat felt constricted, something hard lodged there as each passing moment carried my son farther away and my journey to Little Island closer. The clock was ticking too loudly above the kitchen sink as I thought again about my family alone together on Little Island for 3 days with no referees. Then I remembered that Tamar was bringing her twin daughters. Not referees, but perhaps buffers. Someone to focus on other than the 5 of us. I didn't know what to say when she called to share this news, not recalling my sister ever having traveled alone with her girls. So I said nothing. Silence does not guarantee absolution with my sister. I'll be fine, Joy, she snapped, and thanks for the vote of confidence. You don't need my vote, T. You've got more than enough already. Soon as the words were out of my mouth, I could hear my mother's voice in my head, chiding, the edict she delivered throughout my childhood. Be nice to your sister. She's younger than you. And then later, Joy, be kind. We almost lost her. I resent this immutable stance presented by my mother. Tamar will always be younger, and we will always have almost lost her in that crash that altered our lives in so many unexpected ways. And, although I am the eldest of the little children, I am not my mother's prized firstborn. That spot will always belong to Abigail, who died in infancy. What did that make me? And then I thought, no longer a child, and of my husband not beside me this weekend, and this thought sent me spinning like Alice twirling down into that storybook earth. Dizzy, I lowered my head onto the kitchen table and stared at the crust of toast on Rex's plate. Beside that lay the little paring knife. I picked up the crust and held it in front of me like some sort of rare artifact. I knew I needed help, but Stuart was an hour into his trip, and it was too early to wake anyone else. Anytime you set 2 characters or more talking, just start writing dialogue, it is amazing the things that come out of their mouths. And it honestly, it does feel like it's not coming from me. Obviously it is, but, and every time that happens, it reveals something about the character. And then I have to go explore what that is. Really? You like purple that much? And then it's like, well, really? So what else? You have a purple car? And suddenly and some of those can be directions that are not that helpful, to be honest. And the story behind it wasn't really Joy's story initially. I wrote this Grace being the primary character. I wanted to write a story about a woman, roughly my age, a little bit older, whose mother has just died, because that's what my cohort group is going through now. And so my editor liked it and was interested in buying it. Same editor I had the first time, but she wanted it to be the older daughter's story because she's 39. And she wanted a younger audience because they buy ebooks. So publishers, and I hate to say that, sitting in a bookstore, but they kind of like to sell ebooks. So that gave me an opportunity. Joy was certainly in the book, but she has a critical role, but she wasn't on stage much. And I was feeling this pressure, don't wait too long, we want to see another manuscript. And so as I was going through it, before I sent it to my agent, going through the manuscript, Joy, I kept sort of hearing this quiet throat clearing from Joy because she just wasn't, I didn't know a lot about her. She's almost a placeholder that plays this critical role. And then when my editor said, why don't you make it Joy's story, it opened up this wonderful opportunity to explore her. And whether they stay with me, I've already started writing another manuscript, so there's a little element of I have to forget about the characters or I get really confused. but they seem real to me. So to that regard, I can picture them. They may be gathering again this weekend. Who knows? Yeah, Nancy.
What I liked about your first novel is how you wove the past and the present into the story and developed the story that way, switching back and forth.
Yeah.
The story go. How did you do that in this novel?
Very little. I didn't do it at all initially, and my editor kept saying, "Oh, what I loved about Her Sister Shadow," and I kept saying, "Yeah, I've already written Her Sister Shadow. This is a different book." But there's something. She really wanted to see some flashbacks, so I did put some in, and they're interesting. Again, it's that same question of then you get to go back and see these people as children, and hear them talk, and so there are some flashbacks, but the main thing I really wanted to explore this multiple points of view and just writing a different kind of book. That's the fun, I think, of being a writer. Yeah, Deb.
Seems like both have a piece that draws them together of family secret.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering kind of where that comes from.
Yeah.
The fascination.
It's a secret. Yeah.
Exactly, I know.
Yeah. No.
I won't ask.
Yeah. I don't know. But I do think that families, the Valley News, my local paper, did a piece, and I was asked that question, do you think you'll ever write in, a different genre? And I just think, families are where it all starts. And I just think there's so much material there. I just think those relationships are very interesting. And I'm not sure why.
Well, it's like you said, and what better place for a writer to be sitting there kind of
Yeah.
over, but also you're watching that family.
Yeah.
You wonder what is the secret.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Every family must have.
Yeah, have something. Yeah, right. Yeah, Louisa. Hi. Oh, boy. Good question. I had my whole life to write Her Sister Shadow. In like 18 months. Yeah. Her Sister Shadow was loosely modeled after my mom and her youngest sister. And I really wrote that book for years. I wrote it as a screenplay or tried it as a novel. I just kept trying it. So I knew those characters inside and out and was really fond of them. I feel like I just got to know the little family. And I feel like maybe I was a guest at the end. Maybe it's not the reader, it was me, the author. I was the guest at the end, wandering the hallways and peering in to see what they were up to. But the challenge of the pressure was actually fun. I mean, it's different when you're writing a book that no one is waiting for and no one knows you're writing and no one cares. It takes a lot to motivate yourself to get up every morning and go down there and do that. So... Yeah. Yeah, some family I didn't even know. Yeah. So having that, somebody's waiting for this without a guarantee. It was not like I had a 2-book contract. This was just, we want to see another one, and then we'll let you know. Yeah, it's a crazy business. But Joyce feels that her role in the family, I say families are a more intense kind of gathering, I think, where you have the overt and the covert, because there's a history and because there are expectations and there are roles. And some of the expectations are around roles. I expect you to be this person in our family when we all get together. And Joy fancies her role as the emotional fulcrum for the little family. And there's one scene, of course they boat, and she's terrified of the water, but she's part of the family, so she goes out in the boat, on the water, and feels that if I stay completely still, sit sort of in the center of the boat and completely still, I can keep this boat afloat, and I can keep, and later in the book she realizes that she's doing that for the family as well. So she is, she's the odd man out. She's got her twin siblings, and she's not part of that twin set, and so she She is, she muses a lot, and she's quiet and keeps a lot inside. Yeah. Yeah, nice that you picked up on that. Yep.
Yeah, I'm curious about the craft of your writing. Are you a
Yeah.
person who, like some musicians, who sort of jot things down in audio journals or in this case written journals, and then work on things, then come back to them later, ideas for things that sort of think of fruit from a tree, choose one from here. You do that, or just do mental journals first?
No, I definitely keep written journals.
You do?
Yeah, because I have a terrible memory, and mostly. And the problem then is, so I fill their journals, these kind of spiral-bound things. Yeah, and then, oh, great. Somewhere, was it red one or the green one? That was that great, And so retrieving it is not, but it actually is here. And so I think part of it, I write it down. It almost doesn't matter if I go back and read it again, because the act of writing it down it makes me attend to it. And I heard Barbara Kingsolver interviewed somewhere, and she talked about being a monogamous writer. So she's a polygamous reader, but she's a monogamous writer, and I am too. I can work on one manuscript. Well, that said, so I started Little Island doing character studies and writing notes and whatnot, and then of course Her Sister Shadow came back. So then I did have to switch and be doing the revisions on Her Sister Shadow. So there is a little back and forth at times when a book starts to go into production, but yeah.
How does that work with the process? Do you write chapters and work with the editor, or how?
Now you got to get it all done and then send it to them, see if they like it or not.
Yeah, it's that. For fiction, they mostly want a completed manuscript. I mean, I'm sure are authors represented in this bookstore who have multiple book contracts. And so, Jodi Picoult, for instance, who lives right in the town next to mine, Chris Bogelian, another wonderful Vermont author, I'm sure has a contract for at least several more books. But for mid-list authors who are relatively unknown, you get the whole manuscript finished and pretty well polished. Especially if it's your first, it wants to be buffed and shined and perfect. And then you send it to an agent. So I have an agent, so that part is done. But I send it to her, and she'll email me back and say, I think you need to tighten up this or that, and gives me some pointers. Then she sends it to the editor. Nonfiction, it is usually a couple of chapters and an outline. Yeah.
But then, so you were saying your editor said, so what in the process when did that?
Good question. That happened, so when you write, you sign a contract for a book. The contract will say, we get to look first at your next manuscript and right of first refusal. And we get 30 or 45 days to do that. So when I finished Little Island, we sent the manuscript to the same editor at the same publishing house, which is one of the Penguin imprints. And I mean, yes, it's now Penguin Random House. It is huge. There must be 150 imprints in this. It's a big, big place. So I think it's a little easy to get lost sometimes. So my editor, his name is Jackie Cantor, she read it and she liked it within the 30 or 45 days, but suggested some revisions, which is what she did with Her Sister Shadow. And Her Sister Shadow, which, again, I had no contract at that point, but she really loved the manuscript, but she wanted the sisters younger and the older sister nicer. So before I had any contract or anything, I could have said no, and I might still be looking for an editor for that manuscript. But I knew she was interested, and I liked her suggestion, as I did with Turn It Into Joy's Story, because there was a story there, and I didn't know what it was. So it's a decision that writers have to make.
And is there that kind of back and forth thing, or is it just kind of once or twice?
No, definitely back and forth. I mean, we talked even before she was my editor. She was great. We got on the phone, and I was thrilled, like, oh my God, an editor. I'm talking to an editor. They really do exist. She's very nice and a really good editor. So, so there's some back and forth. Yeah, certainly if I push back and say no. And that continues through she sends, the first phase is she gives revision notes. So those are sort of the 30,000 foot, you need a scene here or something more to put some flashbacks in. And then she line edits. And all during that time, the author can stat or say, no, I want that line intentionally to read that way. So, yeah.
And then when you get printed, and so they design it.
Yes.
And do you have any say in that?
The first time Jackie, my editor, sent me the cover art and said, do you like it? And I loved it. And it was so thrilling. So it's like, my God, that's my name on the bottom of that. And this one she sent two. And she said, I'm not supposed to be doing this, but, and which one do you like? And she said, we all like one. Didn't tell me which one. So they all liked this one. So that was good. Good choice, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, another question about craft.
Yeah.
You're well read, and so when you're writing, do you find yourself sometimes sort of relying on techniques from other authors that you emulate and you like, or do you find yourself having to sort of pull back or even descriptions of scenes, or even the way scenes are set up? Do you find yourself influenced by that a lot or not?
Well, I do read a lot of fiction, and I have favorite authors. I don't read them necessarily while I'm writing. It's really better if I don't have someone else's voice in my head, or it can start to be a little uneven, a little Barbara Kingsolver, a little Louise Erdrich, so I like to read them when I'm not working on a manuscript. And I also love listening to audiobooks. It's this whole other sensory, way of, yes, right, and both with the author reading, which is one experience, or getting a really good actor who has a different voice for every voice, and think, I know if I were reading that book, I wouldn't have read that line that way. Say it's a book set in Appalachia or something. I thought, wow. So,
when you're reading, the first thought was, I just want to listen.
Oh, yeah,
Because I'm just thinking, I'm reading so long, and it's great to watch it, but I'm watching it, and so I wanted to. It's hard to do that, but I know what you mean. It's great to hear it.
Yeah.
And your work is so conversational, in the conversations within your head, but
Yeah.
it works well.
Yeah.
Right.
Good. Thanks, Anne.
I have a question about the male characters in your books. As I recall reading the first book, it must have been a couple of years ago, the male characters don't come off as well. They're ne'er-do-wells.
Well, one did.
Well,
Randall, not so much, but
Okay.
Ned's a good guy. You got to admit.
Yeah.
Gotta love Ned.
Right. Okay, I forgot that.
I love
But I'm
Ned.
kind of curious now, in the second book, number one, is Joy's father still living?
Yes.
He is.
Very much so.
And how would you describe him? And then you gave us some information about her brother, who's a kind of a nice, sweet guy, but he's a substance abuser. and has
A little bit.
problems coping.
Yep.
So I'm curious about now, for the most part, your books are, in terms of, are female focused,
Yes.
with all their strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
and how they surmount the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So, first question, I'd like to hear more about the father,
Yeah.
what role he plays,
Yeah.
and the impact it has on his three children.
Yeah. So, Gar is what he goes by. And he is very much alive. He doesn't have he's not on stage as much as the other characters, but he is a very strong presence. He's a good dad. He and Grace have a wonderful relationship, and that was, back to your question about evolution of characters. My initial thought was, well, obviously the parents don't get along, and I started to write Grace, who you meet. I'll read a section of Grace's, and she was going to be kind of snarky, and of course their marriage was falling apart, and it just didn't take. And I thought, no, these guys have a really great marriage, and that was so much more fun to write. And Grace is delightful, and she, you think Joy has a lot going on, well, let's see what Grace has going on this weekend. And so I like Gar. Yeah, he's an upright, New England family, good guy. And Roger, I'm very fond of. He does have these problems, but he's so likable. So Randall has his issues, but these guys are good. Yeah. So I'm going to read another couple of excerpts, if you can. Okay. Close your eyes. Yeah. And so this is Grace. So this is the mom. This is her section. And she has just received a letter recently with some shocking news. And so she's getting ready for the arrival of her children. So this is the first section is called Gathering. And you see everybody in their homes and doing whatever, getting ready to come to the island. So Grace is on the island. Grace Little surveyed the front lawn of Little Island Inn and decided she'd made a terrible mistake. She should never have put in sod this late in the season. What was she thinking? She'd had to water it every day, and now the ground was soft and squinchy. People's shoes might get wet on Saturday. The big blue ceramic urns of ornamental kale, another mistake, stood like sturdy beacons at each corner of her garden, the garden of someone trying too hard to make an impression. Grace could feel her mother's silent concern. She sighed, and her Glenavimal terrier Sophie, now sitting at her feet, turned a stoic, cataract-clouded gaze her way in a show of sympathetic solidarity, before limping off to her den beneath the potentilla, near the steps at the end of the inn's wide front porch. Even Sophie seemed to know that this departure from Grace's usual gardens of wildflowers, herbs, and blousy no-fuss perennials was misguided. Although Grace could not recall her mother ever growing anything more than the occasional basket of red and white striped petunias, her mother had requested flowers, and Grace wanted to honor that request. Joan had asked so little of Grace in life, given herself so little. Grace wished her mother were here to guide and comfort her, to sit beside her in the Adirondack chairs on the inn's now emerald lawn, watch boats motor in and out of East Haven, and tell her everything looked lovely. But that was precisely the problem. Her mother could not be here to help plan her own memorial service. The day her mother died, Grace found a manila folder in the drawer beside the bed. It contained what looked like a page torn from a diary. On the scrap of paper in her mother's familiar looping hand was written, "Grace, flowers, by the water, have fun." Grace deduced that these were Joan's wishes for her service and had set about granting them. While she believed she'd fulfilled Joan's first two, however imperfectly, given the gaudy garden and sodden lawn, she'd fretted over her mother's final directive for the 3 months since her death. Just this week, she'd added it to her to-do list, hoping it might summon forth a few fun ideas. As yet, the 2 words now anchoring the list remained a distant and daunting finish line that Grace felt certain she would never reach. She loved her family. They were everything to her, but fun was not a word she associated with their gatherings. Grace reviewed her mother's note one last time before carefully folding and returning it to her pocket, then sighed, wishing her mother had provided just a little more detail with her final written instruction. So that's Grace. She's very sweet. Okay, and here's a scene that's, again, written from Joy's point of view, but it's Joy with her siblings, so you just get to see their interaction a little bit. So they're all obviously on the island together. They've been together for since lunchtime. This is after dinner. Already things are heating up a little bit. Tamar's twins are Natalie and Haley, and they go by Nat and Hal. I watched Roger and Tamar drift away from the photos on the table. Nat and Hal had long since lost interest in the albums and now stood murmuring and playing their finger game. Bump, curl, snap, clap, on and on it went. Their mumbling was mesmerizing. Daddy said he was going to the boathouse in search of something, I didn't catch what, and left. My focus shifted back to my siblings. Tamar was clearly trying to convince Roger of something. As soon as she glanced my way, I knew. They wanted to go out somewhere together, and she was going to ask me to babysit. That was fine. There was no need for them to whisper. I'd have been happy to head upstairs with the girls. First, I'd make them cups of warm milk with cardamom and honey, and then we'd select a few books from the library. Joy told you earlier that she wanted to what? Tamar said loudly to Roger, but looking at me. Roger was staring at me too now, beseechingly. I stared stupidly back. Roger and I hadn't spoken earlier. Tamar wanted to ask you to put the girls to bed and stay here to watch them. Roger enunciated each word as though sending me a coded message. But I was just going to tell her what you said to me earlier, how you wanted to... He trailed off, clearly hoping I would complete his sentence. Good God, Roger, I thought, for someone who's lied as much as you are unbelievably bad at it. I searched in vain for a suitable verb phrase. Wanted to wash my hair, read a book, take a walk. None of these would work. Talk to Daddy? I shouldn't have posed it as a question. I sounded uncertain, and I could tell from Tamar's expression that she wasn't buying it. Yeah, I didn't realize I'd told you. Why? I flexed all my acting muscles and believe I managed to pull off a pretty convincing innocent curiosity. Roger's going out. I want to go with him. Tamar could have bored holes in my skull with the intensity of her gaze. Could you maybe put the girls to bed and talk with Daddy after? What the hell was going on here? Oh, I would love to, girls. I turned to the twins to avoid looking at either of my siblings. Roger's look was pleading, Tamar's murderous. But Daddy's waiting for me... Where did he say he was going? In the boathouse. We'll wait. Go tell him you'll talk tomorrow on the run around the island, before we jump off the footbridge. I could hear the taunt in this last line. I'm afraid it can't wait. It was now my turn to stare at Roger. He took the bait. Leave her alone, T. I'm just going to see some of the guys. You wouldn't enjoy it. He moved toward the door, and Tamar followed. The twins, seeing their mother leave, fell in behind her, pleading, Please stay. Can we cook popcorn? Don't wait up, Roger called. I'm going to... I pointed in the direction of the boathouse. Go talk to Daddy. Joy? I could hear Tamar call, but I made straight for the stairs and mounted them 2 at a time, pausing on the second-floor landing, listening. I climbed the second flight of stairs, went into my room, and shut the door. I didn't like lying, but Roger had given me little choice. Well, that's the dynamic. Good. Yes.
How did you read about Grace?
Yeah.
Mrs. Dalloway.
Oh, very nice. Good. Yeah. Oh, great. Wow. Thank you. Good.
And that's interesting. You're speaking of Mrs. Dalloway. I always, when I read, her stories and Mrs. Dalloway, the character, I always felt sorry for her, that she was trapped under the guise of having, overseeing the perfect household, the perfect meal, the perfect this. It was always for somebody, her children, her husband, somebody else. Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be interesting. I haven't read the book yet, but to compare the two characters.
I hear good things about it. I think I know where you can get a copy. Yeah. Interesting. It's a good observation. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. And now we can chat informally and turn the cameras off.